Hi, this is your SAT Vocabulary 14 list. Please take Cornell notes, write down any examples or root words that I say that might help you remember this word, these words. And if you get to a point where I'm talking too fast and you need to slow the recording down, just pause it and take your time. The first word is accede, and when you're pronouncing this, you want to make sure it's accede instead of accede, which is a common mispronunciation. So it's accede, and it means to agree to something. It's a verb, and so it's to accede to the agreement of a contract, to the agreed upon terms of doing something. So basically, to accede is to agree. So I have a handshake, which is kind of like the universal symbol of making an agreement, making a pact. Clearly, these two people have acceded some, agreement. Two is ailment, and it's a noun, and it's a slight illness, usually not something extremely serious. The word ail is actually a verb that means to cause pain. So that's a root word within this larger word. So ailment is a noun, a slight sickness. When you're stay home from school, you just have a small fever or maybe a little cough, but it's not something that you'd probably even necessarily go to the doctor for. Three is comprise, and to comprise is to make up. It's a verb, it's to consist of. So, like my classes are comprised of lots of different types of people. A particular type of food or a recipe might be comprised of lots of different ingredients. So, here I have an example of a type of apple pie and all of the different things that are in the apple pie, what it is comprised of. Four is docile, and docile means or describes something, a lot of times it's used for animals, describes something that's easy to manage, or an animal that's extremely obedient or easy to teach. So you might, my daughter right now is taking horseback lessons, and she is riding a very docile horse, a horse that is super relaxed and easy to manage and control, just by like voice commands. And a lot of times dogs are described as really docile. In particular, labs and golden retrievers are very docile breeds in general, which means they're easy to train, they're kind of relaxed. Five is fortitude, and it's a noun. It is patient courage. Also to think of like a mental and emotional courage. So if you're in a hard situation and you're making it through, but it's challenging, you're probably demonstrating fortitude, this patient courage, this mental fortitude, this mental strength. And so here's an example of someone who's clearly ill in the hospital. Someone's visiting this person, and not only is the person who is ill have to have fortitude, because if you're in the hospital for more than a few days, that has to be incredibly hard. But also the people who are there supporting you have to have fortitude, because they want to be strong for the person who's ill. They want to demonstrate their own courage. They don't want to put their concerns, their sadnesses on the person who's sick. Infallible, I underline the in because it's a root word meaning not. The actual word fallible means likely to err, likely to make mistakes. So someone who is not fallible is exempt from error or judgment, in opinion, in statement, in action, which means they are absolutely trustworthy. And this might be a better thing to write. A lot of time SAT definitions are a little challenging to understand. So if this exempt from error, which means they do not err, they do not make mistakes in terms of judgment, of opinion, or statements, then write absolutely trustworthy. A lot of people feel like the Pope is infallible, right? Because he's, got this direct link to God. He does not make mistakes in terms of his judgment and his decisions. 7 is languid, and this word basically describes someone who's relaxed, but that almost has too positive a connotation for this word, because someone who is languid tends to lack vigor, lack vitality and energy. A lot of the other words that we've heard that are SAT words that start with the letter L, and they sound very similar to this word, they are actually synonyms. So you think of things like lackadaisical or listless, very similar to someone who is languid. Someone who's languid would also probably be described as possibly listless or lackadaisical or lazy. Here's clearly this gentleman is ultimately relaxed, right? He's just like got his feet up, he's on the couch, he's gonna watch some TV, he's got his coffee. Definitely kind of a person that you would associate with the word languid, or you might just describe in that moment as being languid. 8 is neutral, and neutral describes something that the definition says belonging to or under control of neither of two contestants. And again, this is an unnecessarily complicated word, but if you're neutral, you're in the middle. And so the color beige or the color tan, the color white even, very neutral colors, right? You can match them with almost any other color and it's going to work. It's not really strong on one side or the other. It doesn't belong to either of like two contestants or two sides. It's kind of right in the middle. And when you hear the word neutral in terms of politics and countries, and if you study world wars, you'll hear the word, you'll hear Switzerland mentioned. Because as a country, Switzerland never really wanted to pick sides. It wanted to be a neutral country. It didn't want to agree or disagree with either sides. It did not want to get involved. So Switzerland would be described as a neutral country. Precipice is a high, very steep cliff, a vertical cliff, a very high, very steep kind of point at which you might be looking down on things. And a precipice can be a physical place at the top of a very high, steep mountain or cliff, but it can also be metaphorical. So I've heard, graduation speeches where they say, we're at a precipice, right? We're at this moment, we're at the top of our kind of the high school career, looking out onto our future. So it can be both literal and metaphorical. 10 is to relish. And when you relish, you are tasting, you are savoring every bite of the food in your mouth or every second of a particular moment. So if, example, graduation, if you're graduating from high school, you might relish every single moment of that graduation day because it's so special. And someone who loves a hamburger, it just takes that big bite and he is just relish every single flavor that enters his mouth. Semblance is the outward appearance of something. So it's interesting. A lot of times students might have a semblance of control. So they seem in control of their feelings, their emotions, their situations. But beneath the surface, there might be something very different going on that is kind of at odds with their outward appearance. So they might be really struggling at home or with their schoolwork, but you wouldn't know because they have a semblance of control. They have kind of the semblance of order in terms of their life. And a lot of times a workplace can be like that as well, where it looks like there's a semblance of order, right? Like there's files and there's stacks, but it also kind of looks disorganized. So a semblance is the outward appearance of something. 12 is verbose, and someone who is described as verbose tends to use a lot of words. Sometimes this can be seen as a negative thing. So if you're really verbose, you use too many words, or you are described as wordy. My daughter and myself, okay, I'm going to just own that, are very verbose. As an English teacher, I love to talk about stuff, and I use a lot of words. And my daughter is the exact same way. And sometimes her, personality, she's so verbose that it's wonderful. She's in a bilingual kindergarten and she's excelling. She's doing very well. But sometimes it can be really draining when you're with someone who's extremely verbose because they talk all the time. And, that can be kind of exhausting. There's also political figures and people in government and people, in the media who are very verbose. They are known for talking a lot, or they are known for using a lot of words, a lot of big words to talk about concepts or ideas or issues. 13 is trivial, and trivial describes something that is of very little importance or value. And sometimes when we're in high school, the trivial things in our life can seem so important, but if we're able to take a step back, we realize these little things aren't actually as big a deal as we think they are. So something that's trivial doesn't have a lot of importance in terms of, changing your life or making a big changing something from one extreme to the other. So an example might be this image from the movie Clueless, where, Alicia Silverstone is trying to find the perfect outfit. She's got clothes everywhere. And sometimes in the morning, trying to figure out what to wear can be very stressful. But in reality, it's kind of a trivial decision that we're making compared to the grand scheme of things. Enmity is a noun, and it's a feeling or condition of hostility. And to be hostile is to be angry, to be irritated, to have anger towards something. So to have enmity is to have this kind of animosity, this hostility and anger towards something. So a lot of times when you have, I don't know if you have animals in your house, but if you have a dog and a cat, there might be this kind of enmity between them where they have this like ongoing irritation with each other because they just don't get along. And there's some siblings that are like that. There are some sports teams that are rivals that have that enmity. And just be sure to keep the N and the M on the right, kind of the N before the M because it can be a little tricky to spell and even to say sometimes. And 15 is hiatus, and hiatus is a gap or interruption in kind of the continuing of something or the ongoing nature. So a lot of times films or TV shows go on hiatus, right? So at the end of May, a lot of our favorite TV shows are going to go on break and we won't have any new shows through the summer until they pick back up in the fall. School basically goes on hiatus or summer break where we all leave for 2.5 months and kind of re-energize and enjoy our summer. So a hiatus is any gap, any interruption, any pause or break in something that is kind of ongoing, like a TV series or, your high school education, which really goes on for 4 years, but you have a little hiatus each summer. So just think about relaxing, taking a break, which is what most people try to do when they're enjoying a hiatus.